My name is Claire Monroe, 31, Senior Operations Manager. Not flashy, not famous, not the face of the company, but I was the backbone, and they knew it. Still, that didn't stop them from cutting me out the moment I became inconvenient. For years, I kept this company running. Deadlines, crisis management, logistics when everyone else was panicking. I was the first to arrive, the last to leave. I knew every system, every loophole, every shortcut they depended on. But the thing about being reliable is that people start assuming you're replaceable. You become part of the background noise, until you're not. That moment came on a Monday. I walked into the weekly leadership sync like I always did. Same table, same forced smiles. Except this time, the air felt different, tighter, too rehearsed. The CEO, Mark Sullivan, was already seated, which was strange. He never arrived before anyone else. Around him, the inner circle, people I had worked alongside for years, sat stiffly, eyes flicking away when I entered. "Claire," Mark began, his tone too polished, too scripted, "we need to have a conversation about Project Orion." I blinked. Project Orion was my baby, a massive systems overhaul I'd been running for 6 months, already ahead of schedule and under budget. "Sure," I said calmly. "What's the issue?" He leaned back, folding his hands like a judge ready to sentence. "There have been concerns, oversights, missed compliance deadlines, potential exposure risks." I felt my stomach twist. None of that was true. Not one part. "I have documentation for every checkpoint," I said carefully. "Everything is aligned. If there were gaps, it's news to me." That was when Jenna, the new VP of Compliance, chimed in. "Well, Claire, you did manage the vendor relationships directly, and based on what we found, those vendors weren't properly certified during the onboarding phase. That's a serious breach." I stared at her. That wasn't just inaccurate, it was fabricated. I started to push back, but Mark raised his hand. "This isn't a debate. The board has been informed. Effective immediately, you're being transitioned out of Project Orion. Your role will shift to internal advisory. You'll assist the incoming director during the handover." Translation: sit in the corner and wait until we find a polite way to show you the door. I left the room without speaking. No begging, no arguing, no panic. But as soon as I got back to my office, I closed the door, locked my computer, and pulled out a drive. The backup plan drive. I had started it years ago, quietly saving copies of everything: emails, contracts, compliance approvals, meeting recordings. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I knew what this industry did to women like me, the competent ones, the ones who didn't play politics or suck up at happy hours. By sunset, I had built a timeline. Their timeline, Jenna, had been hired through a side agreement, bypassing HR protocols. Mark's brother-in-law owned the consulting firm we randomly selected for the Orion vendor review. Every single oversight they blamed on me, manufactured, designed, to push me out and consolidate power ahead of the company's upcoming merger talks. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, because I was busy planning. The next morning, I resigned. No drama, no threats, just a short email thanking them for the opportunity to contribute and wishing them well. Mark replied within minutes, overly gracious, clearly relieved. He thought he'd won. Good. Let him think that. For 6 months, I disappeared. At least from their radar. In reality, I started consulting, quietly. Through a small LLC no one linked back to me, I offered operations turnaround services, specifically to firms their company was targeting for acquisition. Within 3 months, I was in every negotiation room they wanted access to. Within 5, I controlled enough contracts and supplier relationships that their merger hit roadblock after roadblock. The whispers started then. Why couldn't Mark's team close deals anymore? Why were suppliers suddenly backing out? Why were clients asking for Claire Monroe in meetings? Because while they pushed me out of the project, I became the project. By the time they realized I was the ghost behind every stalled deal and every lost contract, it was too late. and I was just getting started. They wanted to make me invisible, I'd make them irrelevant. Power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where the cracks are and pressing just hard enough to make them widen. That was the advantage I had now. They had removed me from the boardroom, yes, but in doing so, they forgot something critical. I had built that boardroom. Every vendor relationship, every client touchpoint, every operational shortcut, all of it had my fingerprints. They didn't just fire an employee. They amputated the nerve system of the company without realizing how much it controlled. And now, I was free. Free to take everything I had built and use it against them. It started small. Always small. The suppliers first. I knew their pain points. Their margins, their fear of long payment terms. Quietly through my consulting firm, I began offering better deals, not on price, but on respect. Faster payments, more transparency, actual partnership. Vendors talk, word spreads. Within 3 months, the company I left, TitanCore, found itself unable to negotiate favorable renewals. Suppliers demanded better terms, backed by the knowledge that someone else could give them exactly that. That someone? Me. Next came the clients. This was delicate. I didn't poach. I didn't even pitch. I simply kept in touch. The ones who had always been frustrated with TitanCore's arrogance. The ones who had whispered to me after meetings, "You're the only reason we stay." Now, when deals stalled, I was their sounding board. Purely professional. Always off the record. Until, slowly, subtly they began asking, "Claire, why aren't you running something bigger? We trust you more than them." I never suggested they leave. I just didn't stop them when they started pulling away. By Q3, TitanCore's client retention was down 23%. The internal unraveling came next. Jenna, the VP of Compliance, the same woman who helped orchestrate my exit, was struggling. Without me, her department faltered. Audits piled up. Approvals slowed. She began losing favor with Mark and the executive team. I didn't need to lift a finger, but I did make sure my former colleagues, the ones still inside, knew I was watching. Quiet check-ins. "How are things going over there?" Casual, friendly. No pressure. People talk when they feel unheard. Soon, whispers of discontent reached the right ears. Recruiters, industry contacts. By December, Jenna was gone, pursuing new opportunities. Right. Mark Sullivan, however, was still standing, smug, untouchable, or so he thought. But Mark had a weakness. The merger. TitanCore's board had pushed for expansion. Mark's bonus, his reputation, his legacy, all tied to closing a deal with a global logistics giant. And guess who had spent the last year becoming indispensable to that same logistics company? I wasn't just consulting anymore, I was leading when the acquisition talks started. I was in every strategic planning session on the other side. Not as a TitanCore representative, as the gatekeeper. Mark didn't know. Not yet, but he would. By the end of Q4, TitanCore's stock was shaky. The merger looked risky now, thanks to operational issues, all of which traced back to decisions made after I left. Investors started asking questions. Clients jumped ship. Key staff resigned. And Mark? He reached out, an email. Simple, formal. "Claire, would you be open to discussing a potential role to help stabilize the company during this transition period?" I stared at it for a full minute before laughing. The man who humiliated me in front of the board now wanted my help. Of course. He did. He didn't know yet that I already owned half the chessboard. I drafted my response carefully. "Mark, thank you for reaching out. Unfortunately, I'm currently focused on other ventures. Best of luck navigating what comes next." What came next was exactly what he feared. At the next merger meeting, our side pulled the offer. TitanCore was too unstable, too fractured, too toxic. The deal fell apart. Mark's resignation came 3 weeks later. Personal reasons. Of course. By spring, TitanCore's new board chair reached out, not to negotiate, to offer full acquisition. By me. Through my firm. The same one they didn't know existed until I sat across from them in the final meeting and slid the paperwork across the table. They didn't argue. They couldn't. Because when the invisible hand becomes visible, it's already too late. When the signatures dried on the acquisition paperwork, the world didn't change. Not yet. The office still looked the same. The same glossy floors, the same recycled air, the same half-empty mugs of stale coffee on half-hearted desks. The difference wasn't physical. The difference was me. I wasn't Claire Monroe, former senior operations manager anymore. I wasn't the safe pair of hands. I wasn't the one quietly keeping things from falling apart while others took the credit. I was now, simply, the owner. And the second my name hit the internal announcement email, the silence across Titan Core was deafening. The first meeting was mandatory, not for show. Not to threaten. I didn't need to flex. They were already afraid. Mark was gone. Jenna, gone. Their allies? Either resigned or too busy updating their resumes to care. What remained were the survivors and the silent enablers, the ones who watched. Me get set up years ago and said nothing. Now they had no choice but to look at me. I stood at the head of the main conference room, facing them all. Calm. Unapologetic. This isn't a rebranding, I began, voice steady. This isn't a pivot or a cultural refresh. This is a reckoning. Some flinched at the word. Good. It's easy to pretend loyalty when you think someone like me couldn't sit in this chair, I continued. Easier to stay quiet when it wasn't your reputation, your career, or your name being dragged. No one spoke. I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the table. But silence isn't neutrality. Silence is a choice, and every one of... You made that choice. A heavy pause. Then I smiled, not cruelly but honestly, and yet, you're still here. The point wasn't to punish them. Not yet. I had bigger plans. Titan Core needed a purge, yes. But more than that, it needed clarity. Too long, the company had been driven by favoritism, deals made in golf courses and backrooms, and people who used power as a shield instead of a responsibility. That ended now. I outlined my rules clearly. Performance over proximity. Transparency over tradition. No loyalty tests, no inner circles, just results. If they couldn't handle it, there were exits on every floor. Change didn't happen overnight. Some old managers quietly left. Some middle-tier leaders tried to test the waters, challenging policies, undermining initiatives. I let them hang themselves. When Q2 numbers came, back stronger than expected under new leadership, the board asked no questions about the quiet terminations that followed. The company had been hollowed out before I arrived. I simply cleaned out the rot they had been too cowardly to face. Months passed. Titan Core became leaner, smarter, faster. Clients returned, intrigued by the shift. Vendors re-engaged. And inside the walls, the whispers changed. She's brutal, but fair. She listens but doesn't tolerate nonsense. She doesn't care about legacy titles, only if you can deliver. Exactly. One evening, late, as I wrapped up a call with our Tokyo team, I passed by the same corner office that had once belonged to Mark. I stopped. No one sat there now, not because I hadn't claimed it, but because I had dissolved the concept. Entirely. No private offices. Not even for me. Because power wasn't something I needed to showcase anymore. I was the power. Before heading home, I sent one email. Subject line. Clarification on titles. Message. Going forward, please refrain from referring to me as CEO or owner in internal correspondence. Call me Claire. Titles don't matter. What you produce does. Regards, Claire. They used to whisper behind my back. Now, they couldn't. Speak my name without weighing every syllable. Because when you become the owner, you don't just control the company, you control the narrative. And the narrative now was simple. I wasn't the woman they pushed out. I was the woman they now worked. 4. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. That part was already done. Mark and his cronies? Gone. The toxic managers and backroom dealers? History. No, standing in the boardroom now, the same room where they once set me up. It was about something bigger. Redefinition. I didn't want their apologies. I didn't need their recognition. I wanted them to understand that the very room they used to control no longer spoke their language. The first quarterly board meeting under my eye. Ownership started like any other. Polished shoes, tailored suits, smirks that said, "We know how this game is played." They didn't. Not anymore. "Claire, before we begin, will you be presenting projections?" One of the older board members asked. I didn't even flinch. "No," I said, simply. "You will." Confusion rippled across the table. I clarified, "I already know the numbers. I live them. You're here to justify your seats at this table. If you want to keep them, convince me you understand the business as well as I do." Silence. Then frantic rustling of papers and whispered side comments. For years, they sat in that room and nodded while others did the real work. Not today. Today. You earned your chair, or you lost it. By mid-meeting, I had made my point. This wasn't a boardroom of figureheads anymore. This was a war room, and only the sharpest minds would survive here. Word spread fast in the industry. Claire Monroe wasn't running Titan Core like her predecessors. There were no friendly handshakes over golf games, no secret deals at private dinners, no rubber-stamped promotions. Everything was earned. Publicly. Brutally even. Some hated it. They called me cold, unyielding, even dangerous. But others, the right ones, they respected it. 2 months later, at the Global Tech Summit, I was asked to join a panel discussion on modern leadership. I wasn't supposed to be invited. The original invite had gone to Titan Core's official CEO slot, but that person no longer existed. I did. And when I stepped onto that stage, I knew. This was the moment they couldn't ignore me anymore. The moderator introduced me last. Claire Monroe, owner of Titan Core. No one clapped at first. Not out of disrespect, out of uncertainty. I didn't belong to their club. I wasn't part of their boys' club legacy. But when I spoke, they listened. Not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't afford not to. Didn't talk about vision or synergy or whatever buzzwords they recycled every year. I talked about consequences. When systems protect incompetence, those systems will eventually be replaced. Not by rebels, not by disruptors, by people who once followed the rules until the rules failed them. The room was dead silent. Then came the questions. Some respectful, some defensive. One stood out. "Claire, some say you're too ruthless, that you're running Titan Core like a dictatorship." I smiled. "Dictators seek obedience," I said. "I demand competence. There's a difference." The next day, the headlines didn't say controversial. They said Claire Monroe redefines leadership at Global Tech. Back home, in Titan Core's now unrecognizable headquarters, I walked past familiar faces. Some avoided my gaze. Some greeted me nervously. And a few? They smiled. Genuinely, because those few knew what the others didn't. I wasn't ruling with fear. I was ruling with clarity. You produce, you thrive, you cling to the past, you vanish. Simple. I ended that quarter with record profits, new clients, and best of all, respect. Not the performative kind they used to give to my predecessors, the earned kind. The kind that doesn't fade after press releases, the kind that follows you into every room, whether they want it there or not. By summer, a rival CEO I had clashed with years ago sent me a private message. "I underestimated you. We all did. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because when the boardroom belongs to you, so does the silence after you leave. And me? I had mastered silence. Better than anyone." The first to realize it were the competitors. For years, Titan Core had been a predictable player, slow to pivot, easy to read, safe, the kind of company you didn't worry about, until I took over. By Q2, we weren't following market trends anymore. We were setting them. No leaks, no early press, just bold moves, one after another. First, we undercut a rival's major deal with an international client by offering smarter, faster logistics solutions, and did it so quietly they only realized. when the contract was already signed. Next, we launched a tech partnership that leapfrogged every competitor still stuck negotiating outdated vendor agreements. It wasn't aggression, it was precision. Calculated disruption that sent one clear message: adapt to me or get left behind. The second to feel the shift were the vendors. I held a private summit. Not flashy, not publicized. Just the key suppliers and service partners who kept the machine running. In that room, I laid it out simply. If you want guaranteed contracts, stable cash flow, and long-term collaboration, you answer to Titan Core first. That means no double dealing, no special side arrangements with my competitors. Loyalty here earns you growth. Anywhere else? You're gambling with your future. Some were shocked by my bluntness. Some resisted. They didn't last. By the end of the quarter, our preferred vendor program had locked in 80% of our supply chain, cutting competitors off from the resources they used to take for granted. But the real turning point came when the board chair of a rival firm, a man who once publicly called me just another temporary disruption, requested a meeting. I agreed. Not in their office, not at some neutral conference. In my boardroom. He arrived with a practiced smile, the kind men like him wear when they think they're still in control. I let him speak first. He talked about industry collaboration, about leveraging synergies, and, of course, about how impressive my leadership had been. I didn't interrupt. I didn't smile. When he finished, I leaned back and said plainly, "You're not here to collaborate. You're here because the doors are closing, and you're afraid you'll be on the wrong side when they lock." His face tightened. I continued. "You want in? You play by my rules now. No back-channel deals, no poaching. No fake partnerships, transparent terms. And your company steps back from 2 territories we're entering, permanently." Silence. Then, slowly, he nodded. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't have a choice. By year-end, Titan Core wasn't feared. We were respected. Respected in the way powerful forces always are, with caution, with quiet imitation, with reluctant admiration. Even internally, the shift was complete. No one asked why when I made decisions anymore. They asked, how soon? Because I had shown them. Competence wasn't negotiable, loyalty wasn't optional, and power, real power, didn't need permission. One night, after approving a major acquisition, I stood alone in the observation deck of our new headquarters. The city stretched out beneath me, glowing softly. A reminder of how far I'd come. I wasn't the woman they tried to humiliate in that boardroom years ago. I wasn't the quiet fixer they leaned on and discarded. I was Claire Monroe, and they all played by my rules now, whether they liked it or not. Power has levels. In the early days, I thought being the CEO of Titan Core was the top, owning the company that once tried to bury me. That was supposed to be the summit. I was wrong. That was just base camp. The real peak? It's when the people who never thought they'd need you start dialing your number. And when they call, they don't call to negotiate, they call to ask how they should proceed. It started subtle, as it always does. A chairman from a rival tech giant reached out. He wanted to compare notes about global logistics challenges. I accepted. During the call, his questions weren't casual. He asked how I had stabilized Titan Core post-merger collapse, how I retained vendors others lost, how I managed to grow market share when global shipping rates crippled the competition. I answered honestly and vaguely, not because I was hiding, because he wasn't ready to hear the real answer. I stopped asking what the market would allow. I started deciding what it would follow. A month later, he reached out again, this time with urgency. His company was bleeding. Clients defecting, vendors defecting. He asked if Titan Core would consider a partnership to shore up mutual weaknesses. I told him the truth. You don't have weaknesses. You have outdated thinking. Partnering with me doesn't fix that. Following me does. Silence on the line. Then, reluctantly, what would that look like? That was the moment. The crown slipped from his head and into my hands. It wasn't isolated, another major firm, then another. By Q3, I wasn't taking meetings to ask permission to expand. They were scheduling meetings hoping I wouldn't shut them out. In less than 18 months, Titan Core had gone from a once-forgotten logistics player to the standard bearer. If you weren't aligned with us, you weren't aligned with the market. Internally, even my harshest critics fell in line. The board didn't question directives anymore. They asked how soon they should announce them. My executive team didn't debate vision, they raced to stay ahead of it. And my competitors? They copied me, reluctantly, desperately, but they copied nonetheless. One evening, at an exclusive industry gala, the kind I used to get passed over for, I arrived late. Not fashionably, deliberately. When I entered, conversations paused, not because of the dress or the title, because they knew. I wasn't there to network. I was the reason they were networking. A senior executive from a European conglomerate approached me, glass in hand. He smiled politely. Too politely. "Claire, everyone seems eager to get your perspective lately." I smiled back. "Perspective is free. Access isn't." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're becoming the queen maker," I corrected him gently. "No, queens get challenged, kingdoms get divided. I'm not here to play chess anymore. I am the board." He didn't argue, because kings may swagger, but even kings kneel when the ground shifts beneath them. And I was the shift. That night, I stood by the balcony, watching the city below. I thought about how far I had come, from whispered dismissals of just HR, to backstabs and forced resignations, to controlling not just Titan Core, but the entire conversation. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was rewrite. I didn't destroy their world. I became its architect. And they were now living in it, playing by my rules. And when they forgot, I made sure they remembered. Even kings have to kneel, especially when they realize the real crown doesn't sit on a throne. It sits on the head of the one they never saw coming. Ruling isn't about titles. It's about deciding who gets to stay. That's where I stood now. Not at the top. Above the top. Because once you've silenced every doubter, surpassed every rival, and replaced every gatekeeper, the question stops being, how powerful is she? It becomes simply, what does she want to happen next? And in my world, nothing happened unless I allowed it. 6 months after the global summit, the shift was complete. Titan Core wasn't just stable. It was defining global supply chains. Our competitors? They were aligned or irrelevant. Our partners? Loyal or replaced. And the rest? They were quiet, because by now they understood. Claire Monroe wasn't running a company. I was running the conversation. It became clear when I received an invitation. I never expected. The International Business Federation, an exclusive circle, CEOs, government liaisons, financial titans, the same people who once whispered I was just HR, now? They reserved a chair. Not offered. Reserved. At the table, they swore I'd never reach. I accepted. Not because I needed validation. Because it was time. Time to show them what happens when you underestimate someone like me. At the summit, the power dynamic was different. They didn't speak over me, they didn't dismiss my points. They waited for my approval, for my take, for my decision. Should they pivot into new markets? Should they shift tech investments? Should they merge or hold out? I didn't give them answers, I gave them standards. You move when I move. You wait when I wait. And if you can't keep up, someone else will. Simple. Cold. True. But power, real power, isn't proven in public. It's proven behind closed doors. 2 weeks after the summit, one of the oldest CEOs in the industry reached out privately. He had spent decades untouched, unchallenged, and now, his empire was eroding, margins down, clients leaving, vendors defecting, all towards Titan Core. He asked for help. Off the record, I met him in my office. Not a neutral ground. My space, my rules. He spoke for 20 minutes straight, about partnerships, about synergies, about mutual benefit. When he finished. I leaned forward and asked just one thing. Why now? He hesitated. Then quietly, because you decide who wins now. Exactly. And that's when I said the words that cemented everything. You want to stay in the game? Sell me your controlling interest, step down quietly, I'll take care of the rest. His face drained, but he agreed, because kings don't argue with the hand that feeds the board. By Q4, Titan Core absorbed his company, not a merger, a quiet acquisition. His name disappeared from the masthead by Monday. And just like that, another empire, swallowed whole. Because when you rule long enough, conquering isn't the goal anymore. Deciding is, deciding who remains. Deciding who fades. Deciding whose legacy gets rewritten. One night, sitting in my minimalist corner office, the only space I allowed myself that felt private, I scrolled through my inbox. Proposals, pitches, invitations. Everyone wanted my attention. Everyone needed my nod. Closed my laptop. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. I no longer fought for space in their world. They fought for relevance in mine. At a dinner weeks later, an old colleague, one of the few who survived the early purges, asked quietly, "Claire, aren't you tired of winning?" I smiled, not smugly, simply. "I'm not winning," I said softly. "I'm deciding." He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. In the end, I wasn't the queen. Queens get challenged. Queens get betrayed. Queens get replaced. No, I was something more dangerous. I was the one who decided who even gets to sit at the table. To begin with. And in this world now, if I didn't choose you, you didn't exist.